Man, what's going on? What's going on? Danny Garcia sees something. He sees something in Earl Spence that he believes that he can take advantage of. In an interview that he just did, he said in the Mikey Garcia fight, he said he saw certain things that, you know, certain weaknesses and certain things that, Mikey Garcia was trying to take advantage of, but that, he was just too small to be able to take advantage of those weaknesses that Earl Spence had. As if it was a situation where Earl Spence physically imposed himself onto Mikey Garcia. Well, two things. Mikey Garcia was big as hell that night. He was not small like that. That was number one thing. And number two, it wasn't a physical bout whatsoever. There was no physicality into that fight at all. Earl Spence pretty much just used his boxing skills. He boxed and he moved. He jab, straight right, jab, coming with the left, he's a southpaw, and just moved and just beat Mikey on straight boxing skills. That's number one thing. And then the number two thing, Mikey Garcia never really tried to, he was basically in survival mode after a while, hands up, not committing to anything, not allowing himself to be open whatsoever. It's kind of like in the Floyd Mayweather versus Marquez fight, where people try to use the size excuse, like, oh, Marquez lost because, Floyd's size, even though Floyd never used his size in that bout. He just outskilled and outdueled Marquez. And after Marquez knocked out Manny Pacquiao, people were saying, hey, you want that Floyd rematch because, he got you when you were small, when you were just coming up. And Marquez said, no, I don't want to fight him again. He's like, you saw what happened in the last fight. If I fight him, the exact same thing's going to happen. And that fight had nothing to do with size. He's just on he's more skilled than me. He's on a different level than me. So it makes no sense to fight him because the same exact thing's going to happen. These were his words. So I'm not sure exactly, what he'd be able to exploit in that situation. Also due to the fact that Danny Garcia, one of the issues that he has actually is with boxers. People who box and move. That's why Sean Porter decided to move against him. And that was his other point. He said in the Sean Porter fight, he saw Earl Spence being hit a lot in that fight. And, definitely seen that, he knows what he's going to be able to do with his power. But the thing is that you have to put yourself into that situation. Like he said, he didn't have the same problems in the Sean Porter fight. His fight with Sean Porter wasn't as tough. You lost the Sean Porter fight. You got a loss in that fight. And the reason you got a loss in that fight because you wouldn't push it to that next level. You wouldn't push it to that next gear. You wouldn't go into, you had your hands over the fire a little bit like this, keeping your hands warm, but you weren't willing to jump into it. Earl Spence was willing to jump into it because he knew what he had to do in order to win. So he was willing to jump into that fire. If it meant taking risks, whatever it took, he was going to do it. He was going to do it, And with both of them being in that fire, we saw what ended up happening to Sean Porter. So the questions are going to become like, okay, you believe you're going to be able to do all these things, but are you going to be willing to put yourself into the fire? Are you going to be willing to go in there and risk yourself the way that both Sean Porter and Earl Spence were doing? Are you going to be willing to do that? Are you going to be willing to do that? Because for you to implement whatever it is that you're trying to implement, that's what you're going to have to do. Or are you going to be like Mikey Garcia and just coast as you're losing in a fight? Or are you going to be like yourself when you went up against Sean Porter and be unwilling to maybe even have to take shots in order to land shots? Earl Spence was willing to take some in order to give some in his fight. He was willing to go whatever he needed to go in order to get that win. He was willing to do whatever it took to get that win. And I'm not saying Danny Garcia is not willing to do the same thing, by the way, either. I'm not saying that. It's just a question of, are you going to be willing to do that in this particular fight? Because you had a very close fight against Sean Porter You had a very close fight against Keith Thurman. Both those fights were very, very close, but you needed a little extra. You needed to push it to the next level in order to come up with those victories. But you weren't willing to take it to that next gear in order to get those victories. Just like Danny Jacobs. Danny Jacobs, believe that he got robbed against Gennady Golovkin, but he could have pushed those gears a little bit more, and got more of a clear victory against him where it couldn't have been denied. He lost against Canelo Alvarez by 1 point. He was 1 point away from having a draw on all the scorecards. 1 point away. He lost by 1 point. All cards. Where he literally just needed to give just that much more in order to get the victory. But he wasn't willing to go to that next level. He wasn't willing to do that. Even though he had all the skills, even though he had the size, he has the power, he has everything. He should be the best fighter at 160 pounds, hands down. He should have multiple belts around his waist, and he should have been fighting for undisputed against Demetrius Andrews. Danny Jacobs. That's how good he is, but he's not willing to take it to that level. So, you as Danny Garcia, are you going to be willing to take it to that particular level in order to exploit all these things that you're talking about? Because this man's definitely going to be willing to do so. This man's coming from a horrific accident, teeth being replaced, all that, and he's like, I'm good. Give me one of the best guys. I don't want no tune-ups. I don't want no soft touches. Give me one of the best guys. Give me one of them. Give me Manny Pacquiao. Give me Terrence Crawford. Give me Danny Garcia. Give me one of those guys. I want one of the top guys. No tune-ups. That's the mentality that he has. And we saw what he's willing to do in the Sean Porter fight. We saw what he was willing to do when he went all the way to the freaking UK in the belly of the beast against, in order to get his IBF title against Kell Brooks. What he was willing to do when he was having any kind of issues in that particular fight. What the lengths he was willing to go. He was willing to push it to that next level in order to get his victory. Are you going to be willing to do that? Are you going to be willing to get that extra? Are you going to be willing to put yourself into a space where you might sacrifice yourself? Because that's why Mikey didn't push it to that next level. That's why Mikey didn't, kept his hands up the way that he did. Because if he tried to take that win, if he tried to take that risk, there's a possibility of him being put out, being put to sleep, being damaged, even more damaged than he was. That possibility was there. So he decided to say, I'm not going to do it. He wasn't willing to do it. Sean Porter or Spence were willing to do it. In your last two big fights, you weren't willing to do it. So the question becomes in this fight, will you do it? In order to implement all these things that you quote, believe that you're capable of doing. And all these kinks, dents in Earl Spence's armor that you believe that you'll be able to take advantage of. November's just around the corner, and we'll be able to see. But for now, like, subscribe, share. I'm out.